Hello, everybody, and welcome to the HuntScience podcast. I'm your host, Eric Lance, a professionally certified wildlife biologist and natural resource professional, college professor, and owner of Land Source Consulting. The HuntScience podcast is dedicated to bring you the latest information on popular habitat management topics, wildlife science, hunting strategies, and the general conservation and land management practices to help preserve our natural resources. Thank you for joining us today. We are excited to have you with us and hope that you enjoy today's episode. With that said, let's get started. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by our primary sponsor, Land Source Consulting. Land Source Consulting is an Ohio-based wildlife and land management consulting company that I own and operate not only here in Ohio, but through the Midwest and beyond. At Land Source, we work with private landowners just like you to build and develop those property-specific management programs to help bring the goals that you have on your property to life. If you're interested in getting more information on who we are and how we can help you, please visit us over at landsourceconsulting.com. There you can check out the different service packages and capabilities that we can provide. We would love to hear from you, so don't hesitate to reach out to us and schedule that free consultation either through our website, or you can reach out to us and connect with us on our other social media platforms such as Facebook and Instagram. That's landsourceconsulting.com, building relationships for a more sustainable future. All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the HuntScience podcast. I'm your host, Eric Lance. Welcoming those new to the show, thank you for joining us. And also, thank you to those people who are returning once again for another episode. On today's episode, I have a local friend of mine, Chad Sylvester. Chad is the owner of Exodus Trail Cameras. Chad is someone I've known over the years. I've known Chad since he started his trail camera company and have become friends with him since then. Chad is, he would never admit this, but Chad is one of those friends of mine that I view as a professional hunter. His dedication to the pursuit of white-tailed deer, his dedication to conservation, and his dedication to providing a high-end and highly affordable quality trail camera product is just something that I admire about him. I mean, he really takes his passion to the next level and is someone that I thoroughly enjoy listening to their podcast over at Exodus Outdoors. And just watching his social media content and following him, it's always a good time. And, I wanted to have Chad on this podcast because he is a local guy. He's a local friend of mine. And, I wanted to talk to him about a lot of different things. And again, as you can imagine and probably know by now on podcasts, you can start with one conversation topic, but then things start to deviate. And that happens with us once again. Two friends get together and start talking outdoors and hunting and wildlife and deer. And that's typically what happens. And that's what happened on today's episode. But nonetheless, it's an entertaining episode. Chad is an awesome guy to listen to talk to, whether he's on his own podcast or he's sitting down in front of me across the table and we're doing a podcast interview. I hope you guys enjoy this episode. I want to get this started. I'm excited to get it started and welcome everybody to another episode of the HuntScience podcast with Chad Sylvester. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the HuntScience podcast. I'm your host, Eric, and today, like I mentioned, I am joined by Chad Sylvester from Exodus Outdoor. Chad, how you doing, buddy?
Doing well, man. It's good to finally get in here. Like, we've been planning this and talking about this for...
talk about it. I've been planning it for, seems like 5 years now.
It's been at least 5 months. I can guarantee you that.
Well, definitely to get you in here for sure, because, like I told you a little bit behind on it's harder to schedule people than I thought it was going to be, because when you think about doing a podcast, you're like, yeah, scheduling is going to be difficult, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, man, people got lives and you're running a company and I've got companies and I just like, dude, getting everything in here. I mean, it's been at least months since trying to get you in. Same thing with Dan, those guys. I'm like, trying to figure this out when we can get people in. So, but anyway, thanks for coming, man. So
yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, you and I have known each other for a little while. And, for those of you listening, you're a local guy for me here. I mean, you only live half hour from me, not far at all. So, I've been around from when you guys started Exodus from the very beginning and type of thing. So, when I started the podcast, I had a kind of a dream team, if you will, as far as getting people on. And I was like, okay, I got to get you on too, because, like we were talking off air, the whole vibe of the show is, wildlife science, management, conservation, but also the other aspect of this is, bringing hunters on, man, because a
Sure.
lot of people listening to this, are like me, weekend warriors, want to hunt, just enjoy hunting. But there's other guys that want to take that to the next level. And guys like you, I mean, anybody who follows Chad, and I'll have all of his social media and everything in the description of this, but I mean, you follow your guys, especially Exodus's social media. I mean, your whole crew did pretty good last year. I mean, there was a lot of inches that were harvested.
Yes. It was one for the record book.
It was legit. And I show my friends, because I work all over in the Midwest and stuff, and even South, and people would be like, oh, let me show you this buck. I'm like, let me show you the bucks my buddies are killing. like I can't show you. I'll show you some of the smaller ones I've killed. Let me show you what a real buck looks like. And they're like, oh my Lord, is that? I'm like, it's not farm raised, man. That's good old Ohio corn right there. But yeah, so, bringing someone like you on, again, we'll talk about, trail cameras. I mean, you're a trail camera guy. And a lot of people, and I'll put myself in that category. I mean, before I really started talking to you, I didn't realize the variability in trail cameras and what, that kind of thing. So we'll talk into that. But why don't we get going, kind of keep it consistent, who are you, where you're from, what was your upbringing like with the outdoors? Were you a hunt, did you hunt, did you fish, that kind of thing? So
yeah, sure.
Kind of take it from there.
Well, like you said, I'm a local guy, born and raised, well, not born, but raised in Trumbull County. Been here 36 years and 39 years old. A business owner, as you mentioned, dating back to 2015, we started a company, direct-to-consumer, called Exodus Outdoor Gear, with a focus on trail cameras. We've been doing that for 7 years. And then in between, I have 2 small kids, 8 and 6, married. Been married for 10, 11, 12 years. I don't know. I lose track of that. Thankfully, my wife doesn't
probably
listen.
not going to listen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but yeah, man, it's, the whitetail thing, hunting in general, I've been consumed by that since I was 16. Now, there was a little hiatus for me between, college years, playing football, going down the rodeo scene and all that. But been seriously chasing whitetails for probably, I would say, 15 years out of my life. And I say serious as in, like, it is just about 365 for me. As far as my upbringing and how I was kind of introduced to the outdoors, I came from a hunting family, but just a bunch of blue collar guys where no one took hunting whitetails very serious. It was more of a pastime. Like, it was a kind of tradition or a pathway to manhood when you were 12, 13 years old. Like, you went and got certified, went through the hunter safety course. Yeah. And you got to experience your first gun season. And that's kind of how I was introduced to hunting whitetails. And I can remember, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, going through 3 or 4 seasons and not ever killing a deer. And, I would go back to school, because we always would take the first or second day, maybe 2 days of school off, the first 2 days. And you go back to school on Wednesday, and all these guys are talking about doing deer drives and pushes, and they're showing pictures of does they've killed, or small bucks, or sometimes big bucks. And I remember, like, feeling left out of that experience, because my granddad, we were fortunate to have a really good family farm, second generation farm. And I can remember my granddad not allowing us or not wanting us to, participate in those drives and pushes, because he wanted to teach us the skill set and the woodsmanship of learning how to kind of hunt deer on their terms, and not, not be forced into whether it's bad shots or bad safety. There's a proper way to do gun drives, and then there's the Wild West of drives, if you know what I mean.
I do.
And there's a fine line there, but to his credit, he wanted to instill the woodsmanship. He wanted to instill a kind of like a baseline knowledge of what we were doing in the woods. And some of that was deer hunting, some of that was small game hunting. But he took it, I go back to that blue collar approach where it was a pastime. He was the one that was doing QDM like in the late 90s. He was, leaving crops up. He was putting in food plots. He was doing a little bit of habitat manipulation. And then he was also passing deer to get them into a certain age structure. But he was only doing that, from a management or a hunting perspective, only a little period of time throughout the year. It wasn't like a 365 focus for him, because he was running businesses. He had his stuff going on. But that's kind of how I was introduced to the outdoors and to hunting. But then at 16, it took a turn. Like I just got ate with a bug. I was able to, by luck, kill a 177-inch whitetail on that home farm for my first, not my first buck, but that was my first deer I ever killed.
Yeah, that's
Boone and Crockett deer.
Yeah,
yeah. And everyone told me like, you should just hang it up. You're never gonna kill another one like that. And in my mind, I was like, just wait and see, watch.
Yeah.
So, that first gun harvest led to getting a very antique used bow for a Christmas present that year, and then kind of the rest is, I guess, history. Trying to be a self-taught archer, self-taught archery hunter. There were a lot of mistakes, a lot of failures, and I think that part of the process was really important to me, because when I look at things, I look at things from a little bit of a different perspective. Like, I always want to ask myself why. Like, why did X happen when I did Z, or why did Y happen when I did, So it's always the cause and effect type of thing, with a critical mindset of wanting to know why and wanting to know more, that has kind of led me down the path that I took.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm the same way. It's one of those things to where you talk about the why. I had a little bit of a epiphany, I guess you will, from last season, because I started seeing my stand has been up for probably 10 years, like same spot. I have other stands, but that's by far my favorite one. And last year, so I got COVID during the rut, and it wasn't bad, but I couldn't be outside though either. So, but my rut would have been really good. But even before that, kind of leading up to the pre-rut and then even post-rut, I saw a lot of deer, but they started changing their pattern. I mean, it's family property. I could tell you, I know where they're bedding. I could tell you when they're coming out, where their feeding sources are. I mean, I've got them pegged over the years. So I'm going through there again. If you're listening, ask the why, is because I started noticing they're changing the pattern. Right, they're going further away during this path, or they're sneaking around behind me. They're not coming down this main trail that they've traditionally used, and it kind of scratched my head. And I asked that why. I'm like, why the hell is this happening? Well, I started realizing, I'm like, every year I'll kill one or two deer. I'll go out there, and if there's a really good shooter buck, if not, I just let the little ones go. I think I let like 4 of them go last year. They just weren't, anything crazy. But the does and stuff, they come through, and I'll tag 1, maybe 2. And I started thinking about it. I'm like, man, I can't believe it didn't even dawn on me before, but I'm like, every time there's only 4 to 6, to 8, of a group coming through, and I'll shoot one of them. Well, that was one of they start associating that area
Absolutely
with, and I'm like, why have I not thought about this before?
Yeah.
And here I'm not nowhere near as hunt as much as you do, but I'm like, I started noticing the pattern change, and I'm like, why is this happening? I was like, well, the damn stand hasn't moved in 10 years. Yep. That's a 2 or 3 year old doe. I probably plunked her sister, last year. She's like, this area is not a good area to go through during this time. I mean, yeah. I've always said, if deer are any smarter, you never kill them, right? But it's like, well, no dub. So I mean, asking that why is a big thing, because if you don't change your pattern, they're going to pattern you just as much as we try to pattern them.
That's
for sure.
100% accurate, man.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about how do you prepare for the upcoming season. So we can kind of limit it. I guess we don't have to, but whitetails obviously in Ohio is the big game species everyone hunts. But I know you travel, outside the state, going after elk and stuff like that. So something that I've been trying to do, get in these damn lotteries. But how do you approach, your season? So, the season here in Ohio ends in February. What does it look like for you kind of getting ready for next season? I mean, it's a little bit different too. You run an outdoor company, right? You got to be involved in the deer world, but from a serious, whether you agree or not, I call you a professional hunter. It's
nowhere near professional.
Yeah, get on your page. As much as you travel, you're up there. So it's what does that preparation look like for you?
Well, the preparation for me is probably different than a lot of people, because like you said, we travel so much. So just in 2022, there's an early season hunt in probably North Dakota. There's I applied for Iowa, so I plan to spend 2 weeks of the rut in Iowa. So when I look at the whitetail season and trying to do that in multiple states, Ohio a lot of times for me is kind of the third priority because I live here, right? So when I look at key dates, or I'm looking at weather patterns, or maybe even like hunting pressure, because we do a lot of public stuff outside of Ohio, I kind of earmark those dates around my non-resident hunts. And then I leave October post-rut, so that's late November, December, January for Ohio. When it comes to preparation, some of that groundwork has been laid down for years. We talk a lot about annual data coming from trail cameras and trying to pattern specific deer. And again, a lot of people, hunting is like this personal journey, this evolution. I am just at the point where if I have a big deer on camera, that's typically the deer that I'm going to try to kill. Now, most of the time I fail at that.
Yeah.
But that's just part of it. But so the annual data stuff is really, really critical here in Ohio. So we're going back and running trail cameras year over year and trying to find year over year patterns based around weather, based around pressure, based around breeding. Maybe it's a food source, and trying to basically create a calendar for Ohio of saying, okay, the window between October 18th and October 23rd, like the signing phase starts. It's pre-rut. Deer are starting to lay down more sign. Scraping activity becomes more active. Maybe you have a primary scrape located just outside of bedding that was hot last year around those dates and around a certain weather event. So I'm going to earmark those dates in my calendar and look for that same weather event. So if all those variables line up, man, it's scary how accurate that the annual data is of deer doing things, 365 days later, get plus or minus a couple of days based around some of those variables. So when it comes to Ohio, that is a lot of the preparation. So it's groundwork, running those long-term trail camera sets and analyzing the data. Data doesn't lie.
Yeah, and that's one of the things too I got from Kip. Not just from him, but Kip Adams from the NDA. I do some their modules they have every year, and I did, what the hell was that one called? It was the habitat. Or no, not habitat management. I think it was the population. I can't remember which one it was. But it was at his farm, right? So his family farm, which is freaking awesome.
I can imagine.
Oh my God. Deer camp on, it's legit. So, but he takes us through, and something I failed, at being consistent with, but, he pulls out these binders and he's got 30 years worth of individual bucks that he's got from his annual trail camera, data collections. How old that deer is, the data is in there is like crazy. And that's something as a scientist, I'm like, okay, it's something now that I have this new property, where we live and I have access to a lot more woods to hunt that I didn't grow up hunting. I'm like, okay, I need to start collecting this data and putting more cameras out. And even, I tend to do more than like the average, like 1 per 100 acres,
Sure.
type of thing, because, I get the science behind that. But when you're talking about patterning the movement of a deer, you can't rely on one camera. You find a highway like through the timber stand that I have back there. It's a secondary growth, immature, timber stand. So it's like, okay, there's a lot of different areas that these deer can come in and out of. It's not thick, it's not dense. The trails aren't that easy to find. So it's like, okay, I can find, some scat here, I can find, some old rubs here, and I might have 6 or 7 cameras all over that damn place. But it's like starting to pattern, like okay, they're coming from this direction at night, they're going out this direction, like whatever. Well, why are they coming from that direction at night? Probably they're bedding or something over there. So you start, it's just getting that idea, like you said. That's a huge thing. And then you start identifying, those bucks. I started creating like these Excel sheets with data, on there that I can start filling in, type of thing, to go through there and say, okay, this buck, name him, that's the fun part of it. And then say, when, did I see him? Where did I see him? And like you said, pulling the data, the temperature data and things like that. And plus, even on the like I know your guys' cameras have data on there too, but you can even go to like NOAA and look up past data for the month and look at the rain events, look at the temperature, look at the barometric pressure, atmospheric, all that stuff. You can go through there and say, okay, I saw this buck, on the 15th, and go to the 15th, and what was the conditions that day, the night before, and what was it predicted to be the day, there, and start kind of, science is all, like you said, it's keeping, data doesn't lie.
Right.
2 + 2 is 4, no matter how bad you want it to be 5. And it's something I use all the time. So I think that too. And then also, collecting that data too, like harvesting your data, your harvest data. You kill a deer, like what do you do with it? Right? You don't just gut it. Oh yeah, I mean, get a weight tape. Get a pre-dressed and a dressed weight, with the weight tape. You can buy them on Amazon. Is it as accurate as hanging it up on a scale? No, but you're plus or minus a couple pounds. Like you're going to know what it is. Throw some measurements on the antlers. If it's, pull a jawbone, and start collecting that data, because, I got guys, that'll come to me and I'll collect data and stuff for them. And it's like, hey, what are you starting to notice? Like I'll put them in the charts, right? And it's like, hey, what do you notice with this data, right? What's starting to decline? Well, the body weights are starting to decline. Why?
Yeah.
Well, if you're having lower quality food sources or lower food sources in general, guess who's not going to be there?
Yeah.
You're going to start seeing deer few and far between, because there's nothing on your property.
Yep.
I always, people, have always heard me say, like, the highway or the turnpike model, right? Is if you're driving down the turnpike, there's not a damn thing there, except every once in a while you get this rest stop where you can go to the bathroom, you get some food, you get whatever, get gas for your car. It's an area where you can get your needs met. Properties are the same way with whitetails, and the whole goal is to collect that data like you're talking about, to make sure your property is one of those stops. That's increased daylight observations. It's going to increase daylight travel, especially with the does. And if the does are traveling, the bucks are traveling during the rut, because they're trying to find and breed the does, right?
Yep.
So it's just common sense. But on the same time, you take most people that have full-time jobs and stuff like that, it's hard to get out there, especially with kids. I look at myself. I've got 2 girls that play travel softball. With me owning the gym and the businesses that I own and things like that, it's like, dude, to go out there and just go out and walk around trying to find rubs and scrapes and, deer trails, I'm like, I don't have the time to do it.
It is difficult. But one of the things, with annual data, and I'm going to tie this back to a mistake that a lot of people make with trail cameras, and I think it's one of the biggest mistakes, is that they're checking them too frequently. So when you're constantly putting pressure on your property, whitetails, they know it's pressure. There's human intrusion there. They don't necessarily know that you're walking around with a bow or a gun, or you're walking your dog, or doing whatever. They just recognize it as pressure. So when you start checking your cameras on these regular intervals, you talked about deer patterning you before you pattern them, that is a mistake that we see a lot of people make. But the great thing about annual data is you can set trail cameras up long term. Make sure you have good power, proper power source. Make sure your SD card has enough capacity. But you can let those things run and do work. And we find that those data points are so much more accurate when you're not negatively impacting deer movement. And it's not just through the hunting season. A lot of people only use trail cameras through the hunting season, but there is so much information post-season, when are bucks dropping and shedding their antlers, when are fawns being born. Like, we know that the gestation period's 201 days plus or minus a couple, right?
Yeah.
When you have an early fawn just getting its kind of legs underneath of it on a trail camera picture or video, that fawn's a few days old. I mean, there's some guesswork there, but you can backdate the conception date of when that doe was bred. And we all know the rut happens on a bell curve. Peak breeding's the 7th to the 10th, something like that. But when you have those outliers, you can physically, like a late-born fawn, for example, if you have a fawn that's dropping in July, you can backdate that and say, okay, well, that doe wasn't bred in November. It was bred in January.
It was the second rut that probably came in.
Exactly.
But the other thing is, too, with that is, if you harvest a late season doe, like, check to see if they were pregnant, because you can do fetal measurements, and the fetal measurement is even more exact. And I can tell you the day that doe was bred, because you start looking at it to where, a deer reaches sexual maturity. I want to say it's poundage based.
It's 80 pounds.
It's 70 or 80 pounds, somewhere around there. So, you got to think about it. If you've got and this is where I see people, ask a lot is, you have those late dropped fawns. They're not reaching that peak weight until later in the year. Especially, they don't have near as long during the growing season where all the food is readily available.
Exactly.
So when the winter stress comes in and things aren't available, if you're not supplementing your property with cool season plantings, things like that, they're not going to reach that weight until a little bit later, and it's going to be that December, ish. That second rut is when that deer is going to be bred. So it's, those things have, that's why it's so important to manage your property, because for herd health, it's like Harper always says, it's like this should be a way of life. It's not a single event. I should like going out there and working my property and putting things out there for success. Having my, early season plantings, having my, plantings that carry me through the growing season, have my cool season plantings. If I've got a neighbor that's got corn and beans, guess what? I'm not planting.
Yeah.
And I'm not going out there and putting beans in.
Diversity.
Exactly. That's a huge thing. And when I talk with people, on their properties, it's like, well, and I talked with Matt and these guys, about this. I'm like, in the articles, it's like, look at this awesome clover blend. It's like, dude, there's clover all over your property. You just put an Arby's next to a McDonald's, or whatever. It's just a different version of the same thing.
Yeah.
It's obviously, more nutritious than fast food for us, but it's the concept, right? It's that diversity. Man, put something different here that's not here. Find a different blend. Get creative. Go out there and see, not just because it's in a magazine. Right. It doesn't mean it's going to work on your property. Right. You look from the hunting strategy side for what you do, and there's probably techniques that someone has implemented that you're like, hey, I'm going to try this, and it doesn't work for shit. On my property or when I do, and I got to do this. It's no matter what you do. This is much of a learning curve as anything, because there's going to be those failures. There's going to be, and those things that you didn't think are going to work are the ones that actually work. From the management side, from my standpoint, that happens all the time. I'm like, okay, you want to do this, we'll do it. And you're like, shit, that worked.
Yeah. On that point too, looking at the big picture, most property owners, they're multi-use properties for the most part. Occasionally you have the rec piece and
that's another hard thing to manage too.
It's very difficult. Yeah. But when you're looking at what you're trying to implement on your parcel, look at the deer neighborhood. When you think about the home range of a whitetail, you're talking, I don't know, 500 acres, 600 acres, square mile.
Yeah.
Maybe a little smaller than that.
Yeah, probably now, especially with as fragmented as everything is. I think that number used to be smaller, but I take those numbers with a grain of salt because, especially here in Ohio, if you just get on Google Earth and zoom out, the amount of impact that humans have with row crop, production, either, production agriculture, whether it's row crop or livestock. You're pushing that range further and further.
Right. But the main point there was, look at whatever you're doing on your property. Look at the big picture. What is your neighbor doing? Yeah. Like you said, if your neighbor has corn and beans, you probably don't want to plant corn and beans on your parcel.
Yeah, I'm a huge proponent of, I guess it's a term that's been thrown around a lot, with the whole regenerative wildlife and stuff like that, regenerative agriculture. Oh, excuse me. In nature's image, right? So taking those old fields and allowing goldenrods and ironweeds and asters and the natural clovers and ragweeds and that, weeds that, quote unquote, that people, always talk about. It's like, dude, most of that stuff is over 20% crude protein plus.
Yep.
It's highly palatable. It's highly digestible nutrition. It's better than anything you're going to plant, so it's like, again, zooming out with your concept, if I've, my property that I hunt, it's surrounded by agriculture, so going in there and managing the timber and doing select cuts and manage what I can control. I don't need to put a food plot in. There's food sources all around, my property. It's just, I got to piggyback off of, which ones are they going to and when and analyzing the trail camera data. But it's like, the limiting resource in most places is cover. It's not food.
You're correct.
Food is especially in the Midwest, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Now, could there be better sources of food? Yes, but there's food, right? So it's always those things, that diversity, man. People don't ever want to manage their timber. They do. They're like, well, I'm just going to log it. It's like, man, there's so many better things you could do. But anyway, we could go down that rabbit hole.
Well, just one more thing on that point. We talk about, cover or security cover, bedding opportunities kind of being sometimes overlooked, or the key factor. When you start looking at hunting bucks in a surgical manner, like targeting a deer and going in with precision and saying, okay, I'm going to set up here and kill this deer because I know he's bedded here, you have to be able to hunt where those deer are laying their heads during the daytime hours. And that is a very, very difficult thing to do.
They're prey species. Their whole biology is governed around not being preyed upon.
Man.
Yeah. So it's like, hey, I know they're bedding in here. It's like on my parents' property where I hunt. It's like I know where they're bedding. But I don't go anywhere near it. but I know where the travel corridors are from that bedding that are 100, 200 yards away, that it's like they're going to come right by me because the food source is right over there. There's a big ag field, there's an apple orchard, there's there's all sorts of everything to my left, they're bedding to my right. But now there's another path over there to where they go behind the neighbor's house because they feed them. So it's like every time I'm on a stand, I see them every time. It's just 50-50 on whether or not they go that way or that day they're coming towards me. And we were talking about the different change and how they're coming, by my stand. So I gotta change that. But yeah, I think people, they make it too complicated, but at the same time, I don't think they're so overwhelmed with information that's out there. I mean, get on YouTube and type in deer management. Good God. Yeah. It's just like, and how do you decipher what's good and what's bad?
Yeah.
But then at the same time, what's good and what's bad, for them might be the role switched, on our property.
Right.
I remember, I forget what chestnuts I bought one time. I was at a property. It was a utility project I was doing some permitting on, and there was a co-op there, and they were selling bags of chestnuts, right? And I'm like, everyone always tells me that deer love these things, and I'm like, it's like $10 for a 50-pound bag or something like that. I was like, I'm gonna buy a couple bags. I put them. I just experiment. I just want to see, like, hey, those aren't in our area. I want to see if they're actually going to eat those versus, everything else. So I spread them around. I had a big oak stand, where there was a bunch of acorns and stuff. And I was like, okay, I'm going to spread these kind of in throughout. And I just want to see how much they're going. But the pile was like getting smaller and smaller. I'm like, this is okay. Now we're talking. But like, I'm not seeing any deer, right? So I let it go for like 2 weeks or something like that. And I finally jump in the stand, and I'm out there. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to, like, they're here. Like, this pile's getting lower. I see deer tracks and stuff like that. Man, I seen the biggest squirrels I've ever seen in my life. I was just feeding these things, man. It was like a wave of just coming over there. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me, man. But, and I saw deer come by. They would sniff them and just walk. A couple of times they would chew on them, and eat them, the younger ones. But by and large, it wasn't anything measurable to where I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to put those out. So again, you look at someone that swears by those things because they're in their area, they've got a chestnut orchard or whatever it is. Well, yeah, they're going to eat them, right? Think of it again. I always try to equate it when I'm talking to people to human, analogies. I'm like, here in this little hometown where I am, there's little mom and pop restaurants that, like, people that are from here are like, oh my God, it's the best, burger or whatever it is in the world. But then people from out of town are like, it's okay, type of thing. But for us, it's everything. Like, I'm going to say, no, like, this is how they do it. This is how you cook this. This is how you do this. But someone else looks at that and they're like, hey, okay, it's good. I bet it's good, but it doesn't mean, for me, it's not the best. Right. It's the same thing with managing your property. Yep. It's like, you can watch guys like, all the big names out there, the ways that they're doing it. Now, they have high success rates, so probably want to listen, but not everything is going to work, to the T. That's why it's hard time to kind of prescribe, to someone like, hey, do this. I can give you some recommendations. This might work or this might work, but ultimately it's trial and error.
Yeah, trial and error, and there's a million ways to skin the cat.
Yeah, there is.
A lot of ways to do it.
So what is it? We kind of detoured there a little bit.
We did a little bit.
Yeah. But
it was good, though.
It's okay. So going back to, like, prep, so, like, for me, so I know you're a fit guy. I try to work out and stuff a bunch too, because just for health reasons too. But, also, it takes a lot, man. Climbing up into deer stands, most people don't think about it. It's like, hauling all your gear up, backpack up there for the day and, dragging a deer by yourself out of the woods. You harvest a 100-pound deer, might not seem like a whole lot, but drag a lifeless 100 pounds through the woods and tell me how it goes. Walking through the woods. I'm a biologist, like everyone here knows, and I'm, work, these utility lines and things like that. I'm walking up and down hills. It's like, hey man, it's a demanding thing. So what's your, obviously you work on stuff, but as far as like shooting your bow, I shoot my bow a lot, but what's kind of your thing?
Well, on the physical side, this is something that I battle with a little bit, because I don't think you need to be a world-class athlete to go kill deer. Mm-mm. However, the discipline that it instills of doing things that you may not want to do, like when you get into November 9th and you've been at it for 8 days and maybe you haven't had an encounter or haven't seen or witnessed the success that you were imagining in your mind, like, it's hard to wake up November 9th, November 10th, and freeze your butt off on some of these all day sits. So for me, the physicality is as much about being disciplined as it is the physical side. Whitetail hunting to me is as mental as it is physical. Now, when you start talking about Western hunting and backpack stuff with elk, it's a completely different animal.
Listen to Rogan's podcast and listen to, it's legit. I mean, you have to.
You have to. To carry 40 pounds or carry your camp or whatever it is on your back for double-digit mile days at elevation and do it for days on end, it is a difficult thing to do. And the last thing you want to do is be 1,000 miles away from home in the Rockies chasing elk and be limited by your physical capabilities.
Yeah.
You can't let that
happen.
From
a safety standpoint.
Well, that too. Yeah. If you're doing backcountry stuff, you're your only resource.
Yeah. I've even had guys that I've worked with, on these utility lines and stuff like that, to where, we're walking up some of these hills here in Ohio, which aren't bad. They're steep, but they're not bad.
Right.
You get to the top and they're about to have a heart attack.
Yeah.
It's like, hey man, we're in the middle of the woods. You need to take a break, type of thing. But, the other thing is I always tell people, I'm like, man, you got to shoot your bow. If you're going to bow hunt, you got to shoot your bow. Yeah. Because the whole ethical shot, you need to be able, I do a lot of firearm shooting. I do a lot of, we've got our own range. I do a lot of, tactical stuff and long range stuff. But even with the bow, I'm like, you've got to be able to take a good, accurate shot. You've got to know your capabilities.
Yep.
Pull a chair out there, sit in a chair, shoot from different positions, kneel down. Because if stuff I'm sure you've gotten into with spot and stock, man, you're not taking that beautiful, shot.
It never happens like that, man.
And if you have I think what Dan set my bow at? I think my bow was like an 80-pound draw or something like that. It's like, hey man, you're pulling 80 pounds back and you got your adrenaline spiked up, and now all of a sudden it's like your arms just moving all over the place, and it's just like you're poking, a hole. Yeah. You're trying to figure out where the hell you're gonna hit that shot. There's so much that goes into it, and I see that a lot. People come over to my house and shoot their bow, and it's like, hey man, you're gonna bow hunt, you've hit a vital spot once out of 12 arrows.
Yeah.
We're 20 yards away, man. It's not that I'm an expert, but I try to shoot a lot.
Yeah.
My goal is at least 50 to 100 arrows a day. Doesn't always work out that way some days, but going back to the discipline, it goes like with anything in life, man. It's like I hate getting up in the 5:30 in the morning going to the gym. It's the only time I can go. Everyone's like, I don't have time for this. It's bullshit. You have time.
Yeah. Well, I think with the archery stuff, you have to be proficient with your equipment, whatever that looks like. There's a baseline there. But you also have to have a sense of confidence that you have belief that you can execute things in the field with your equipment. And I think that's having the mental confidence is a big part of that. But also, to your point, things don't always happen the way that you have them planned out in your mind. Occasionally you get the perfect broadside shot and you're standing on 2 feet, but that's a mistake I see a lot of people make when they're out at the range practicing, is taking these, perfect broadside shots where you have your feet underneath you, your body square, and you're executing your shot sequence to where it becomes second nature, or kind of subconsciously, your anchor points are all good.
Yeah.
Which is good. But once you get to that level, you need to, in my mind, take practice in real life hunting opportunities. So if that's a spot stock, you need to be able to shoot off your knees. Maybe you need to shoot off your butt. Maybe you need to shoot off of one knee. Maybe you need to shoot peeking around a tree. It doesn't always.
Yeah.
If you're in a stand, you need to be able to bend at the waist and not bend at your arms. So the archery wormhole. Man, there's a lot to it.
Yeah.
There is so much to it. There's so many variables, but the big thing is, and you kind of hit the nail on the head, is just practice in multi-situational situations to where when you experience that in the field, it's not foreign to you.
Yeah. I always tell people, because here at the, where we're filming this is in my martial art academy, is where my podcast studio is. So, between doing that and the defensive, things, combatives that we do, it's like, hey man, a plan is nothing more than a set of things that go wrong. It's you. 3 is 2, 2 is 1. Pick the analogy, pick the whatever. Right. It's just how it is. You need to be able to adapt, because nothing is going to go as planned. I'll tell you, the buck I killed. So I didn't kill one last year. The buck I killed 2 years ago, 3 years. I can't remember. But anyway, it was the same thing. I mean, that deer came up, and I wasn't even going to harvest it. Like it was a good looking buck. It was an older buck. It was by no stretch of the imagination probably something you would shoot, because I know you're picky. But but I mean, it was definitely a shooter, and I was going to let it go, you know. But here I am, present this opportunity to where this deer is 30 yards from me broadside, not paying attention. Just got it's peak rut. This thing's run down, you know, and I'm like, okay, this thing isn't moving. I'm in my head, I'm having a dialogue. I don't want to get to hunt that much because of work, blah, blah, blah. All right, man, it's a shooter deer. I aged it. It was, you know, I ended up pulling jawbones, about 4.5-year-old deer. And I'm like, so from age point, okay, let's do it. So I'm sitting down. My bow is on the hanger. I have to like grab the bow, and I got to like move my hand and get up. I get up, the peep sight's twisted. So I'm making a shot, barely being able to see through that peep sight. It's like no part of that shot was an orthodox shot.
Right.
I was twisted way more than I wanted to be twisted because I didn't want to move too much, but I shoot from weird positions, and I just was like, okay, this sucks. You know, I've got one chance at this, you know, and it worked. You know, it was like pulling a rug out from underneath that thing. It died in 10 seconds.
Well, that's a good point. Like when you said you have one shot or one opportunity, like when you're out practicing with your archery equipment, there's so many times guys will shoot 50 arrows, shoot 25 arrows, and not think about the field application of having one shot, having to execute one shot. So I always make that a priority in my shooting regimen. Like I'll go out and shoot 25 or 30 arrows, but when I end with one purposefully shot.
Yeah, this is it.
Like make sure everything's good, make sure everything's executed, and whether that's good or not, I don't know. It works for me.
Yeah, it's a good concept because we do the same thing with shooting. It's like, hey, man, like if you're a new shooter, like we'll bring you out with a pistol. We'll start off with a 22 and kind of work your way up. We'll do like the flat, you know, wide stance shooting just for fundamentals. But it's like, hey, now we're going to go dynamic. Now you're going to carry this, 35-pound kettlebell with one arm. You're going to run down 50 yards and run back to this spot. Now take a shot when your heart rate's all jacked up. Like now things have gotten real, but when you're out there too, like, things that I'll do is I do along the lines of the same thing you do, but I do it like towards the end. I'm like, hey man, I've shot 50 arrows, 100 arrows, whatever it is. I'm starting to shake a little bit. This is it. This shot right here, it needs to be money. But I also shoot from different angles. So rather than being straight broadside with the deer, I'll shoot offset of the deer to say, okay, if I aim for the heart here, what am I actually going to hit? What's the penetration going to look like? As it goes through in here, am I going to hit the chest plate? Am I going to hit, depending on how it goes? So I think those are considerations to take too, because when you're on the field, how many times have you shot a deer that was perfectly broadside to you? It may be broadside, but it's at a 45 to your left or a 45 to your right or an 80 degree, insert, angle degree, but understanding where the flight path of that arrow is going to go, you have to be in tune with your equipment or it's never... you're going to have issues. You need to be able to make that change. There's a branch in your way. Okay, well, if I need you insert here, issue. So, okay, yeah, I mean, that's always something I think of, as far as, what's the planning look like? And, of course, I'm sure, putting in your lotteries and getting your plane tickets and, stuff like that most people aren't going to run into.
Right.
But, yeah, it's getting in the mindset because I think too many people are like, all right, it's end of August, first week of September.
Pick my bow up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's you can get away with it, but it's just like, hey man, like just the more you shoot, it just the discipline of doing it. You just got to do it. It just sucks, but you got to do it. I mean, what else is there? Okay. So, kind of move into, Exodus, right? So I think you guys you guys have been 7 years. I didn't think it was that long. Yeah, it's crazy, man. But I mean, you guys have made, a pretty good name for yourself. I mean, you guys specialize in trail cameras. But I mean, I follow the Facebook pages and social media pages and your guys' stuff on the people are like, hey, what camera? And I always like those questions. I always go through the comments to kind of see like how many people are actually, what I'm saying, like Exodus cameras, and you're starting to see that a lot more, which is obviously good. You guys, have good cameras. I mean, I only use your guys' cameras for sure, and that's not just blowing smoke up your ass. I've told you that from day one. If I don't like it, I ain't going to use it,
right.
type of thing. So I still have the freaking original ones, man. But it's like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's my thing. But anyway, so I think a lot of people, and I'm sure this isn't the first time you've talked about it, first time you've heard it, but I think it's always curious, how did you, or why did you start Exodus? And then how the hell do you start a trail camera company? I think that's intriguing to people. Because, I mean, you look at a trail camera, you're like, I work, someone that works, like, I'm an accountant or something. Like, like, how do I start something? Like, I don't even know where to begin. I think it's I know the story, but, you know, I think it's an interesting story that people like to hear.
Well, the reason we started the company almost for personal experience and personal purpose, I guess. So we had been running cameras since the early digital days, 2001, 2002, 2003. And my brother had actually ran cameras back when you were still putting film in them. So like 35 millimeter days, and you had to be super careful not to expose the film. Or you would, you'd pull the film out and rush to, 1 hour photo development or whatever. And you'd have 10 pictures or 20 pictures of squirrels or something, goofy. So, running cameras for, I'm going to say a decade. So like 10 plus years. From a consumer standpoint, it was like sometimes you would get a camera and it would work, and sometimes you wouldn't. And not always was it the product's fault. Sometimes it was our fault. So there was a learning curve there of understanding how these things work, which a lot of people don't understand how they work. But then when 1 year we would have a camera or a brand that we really liked, and we felt like we had it performed well. So we'd buy another one the next year and kind of build a fleet, but we wouldn't have the same experience. So you'd go to a different brand and buy a different model. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. So we were playing this, I don't know, like a game of Russian roulette. Like sometimes this stuff would work, sometimes it wouldn't. And then on the back end, these companies were selling to box stores or selling to retailers, and they really didn't care about back end support on the product. And there was a giant gap in the marketplace where there was a need for someone to care about the end user, not just the box stores.
Because everybody deals with that with a trail camera. I mean,
they're technical products.
They are, and it's like you spend $200, $300 on a camera, and like you said, hey, this, quote unquote, brand, insert here, I have no problem with it. You buy the same exact one 6 months later or a year later, you save up a couple bucks, maybe buy two, and now you have problems with at least one of them. You know, it's like the consistency, because I mean, these things that are mass produced.
Absolutely.
Hey man, like you're going to have things. And like you said, it's just like that with anything, it's like, they rather just ship you a new one because it's easier. It's take a new one and it's probably going to work better than the one you had a problem with. And as an end, you're like, okay, but it's like, hey man, like they're still building shit, and it's just like, you buy another one, it might work, might not work.
Game.
Who's going to spend, $400? If I go to you, I'm like, you're going to buy a product for $400. It may or may not work.
Yeah.
Most people are going to be like, you think about it, and that's why people get frustrated.
Yeah. So that was, filling that need on customer support, the education. I mean, cameras. We started in 2015. Digital cameras had been around for 15 years, but there was no educational authority in that space. Like no one was putting out content in the digital days. I mean, we're talking web 2.0, like we were using the internet, and no one is helping people. No one is educating people on best practices. Maybe it's power source, maybe it's SD cards, maybe it's settings. So we basically built this company from what we wanted to experience as consumers. And in 2015, the direct-to-consumer trend was just starting to peak. People were just starting to leverage the internet. And we followed a brand that I highly respect, and that's KUIU. Jason Hairston, the founder of KUIU, also started Sitka Gear. There's a whole long story there. But KUIU kind of paved the road for D2C companies in the outdoor space. So I don't want to sit here and claim that, being consumer direct was our idea, because we've seen it work there, and we've seen it work in other marketplaces. I mean, you look at
it's all over
mattresses.
Now.
Yeah, like 7 years later,
it's a standard of practice now, pretty much. Yeah.
So we knew we were going to be D2C. We knew we wanted to leverage the internet, and the business model allowed us to focus on the end user, which we wanted. Like as consumers, that's what we wanted. And throughout those 10, 12, 13, 14 years of running cameras and having those failures and experiencing those problems, that led, again, me having a critical mind of like, okay, why is this thing taking pink pictures? Like what's broken on this thing? Or why are my night pictures all black? So we just started tearing things apart and like just figuring things out, like on an autodidact level, just self-taught. I'm not an electrical engineer, but you can learn so much if you know how to use the internet, and that's kind of how we started.
Yeah, it's, I imagine, because the first time I heard your story, I imagined like taking a camera apart. I'm like pointing at something in the camera, like I don't even know what the hell that is. Like what?
Yeah.
Like where would I even look on Google to find what the hell that piece is and what it does? Like,
Right.
So for there, I mean, it's an interesting story because you take something like that is a technology, and for someone who doesn't have a technology background, I mean, you were in construction and stuff like that. Right. It's like that's just it's a different world.
It is.
You know, to be able to go through there and break, you know, the components down of a trail camera and understand what sensors are doing and what these chips are doing and stuff like that. That's just
DigiKey. Like in 2012 to 2014, DigiKey and like these sourcing websites for electronic components that was my best friend.
Yeah. I can only imagine. So going into that now, so now you break these things down, you start, you know, figuring out the components, how they work. How did you go about, you know, sourcing out and do it? Like, so the big thing is like, now you're like, okay, here's a problem, you know. Listen, I like watching Shark Tank. So it's like, hey, here's a problem in a particular industry. Okay. I think I have a solution for the problem, but now how the hell I start designing a trail camera for this brand that we're starting? Like, how do I design the shape of it? How the lens? How big does it have to be? The sense, like, where do I even get this shit made? Like, type of thing. I mean, what that had to have been.
It was a difficult road, man. A lot of guesswork, a lot of trial and error. So from, I guess, the problem solving aspect is, you look at trail cameras and they're out in the weather 365, right? So trying to minimize the water ingress or weather impact on components is really crucial. So when you start looking at a housing design, you look for potential failures, right? And you try to eliminate as many of those as you can. When it comes to the manufacturing process, we, you know, being direct to consumer, you're able to spend more money on the product. So you put conformal coatings on the board to help against moisture, like basically a moisture barrier. And then there's, man, this is gonna get deep. So you can reel me in anytime you want.
Hey, that's why there's transcripts for this thing. People can rewind it. Like, here it is. Because people need, I mean, yeah, anyway, it's interesting.
So when you start looking at electronical components, there's different grades. You have consumer grade components, you have medical grade, industrial grade, automotive grade, and they all have different lifespans, right? So the basic business models that everybody else was following was, let's sell these things on a price point, right? Let's make them as cheap as possible. We'll introduce our markup to the retailer. The retailer, you know, carries their margin, and then you sell them to the end user. Like that's the traditional business model. So looking at the longevity perspective, again, that was a pain point that we felt as consumers. Like sometimes they would last a year, and maybe you get 14 months out of them. That was pretty common. Like you get 14 to 18, 24 months out of a camera, because they have a 1-year warranty. So they're designed with that obsolescence mindset of, okay, so if this product has a 1-year warranty, let's just build it to guarantee it's going to last at least 12 months, maybe 14 months. And maybe if you're lucky, you have one that lasts a few years. So we tried to take all of that out of the equation from the beginning. So we knew what problems we wanted to solve. Actually solving them and bringing something to market is a whole different concept. We were very, very, very fortunate that one of our other co-founders, Matt Klein, who's no longer with us, but he had some contacts within the industry, and it kind of happened by chance, where an overseas manufacturer was, they were at a convention. Can't remember if it was in DC or New York City, but they were stateside. They have a stateside rep here, and we met them at that convention, and then we basically took paper sketches and these ideas and said, "This is what we want to create. Can you help us?" Because, yeah, we had some very limited knowledge on components, sourcing components, but like when it came to the firmware and software side, like I am not a coder. Like I have no, like you look at Python or whatever program that you're using, like, and it is completely foreign to me. Yeah. And you think about trail cameras work from voltage signals. That's how all the information is passed. That's how each component is controlled, is through voltage. That's how the information is taken from the sensor and put onto an SD card. And some of that stuff, when you start talking about capacitors and resistors, like it gets really, really complicated. So we were very fortunate that we got introduced to that company, and they were, by chance, they were one of the larger trail camera manufacturers that had some in-house engineering to assist us in that process. So it happened, almost by chance.
So is it kind of like the seed companies, to where there's only a handful of companies that actually distribute seed?
Yes.
And then everyone's like, hey, I buy this, mix this. It's my quote unquote proprietary blend, but it's like a half a dozen of distributors. So is it the same thing for components for like trail cameras and stuff like that?
It is similar, yeah. So when you start looking at the trail camera marketplace in general, there's only so many companies or factories that will build cameras or electronic components in general. And in reality, they're within a 5 square mile area, right? So when you start looking at the individual components, the marketplace isn't big enough for companies to go out and develop their own chipsets. So a lot of the technologies, whether you're talking cell modules, image sensors, a lot of it's carryover or
from
passed
other
through
industries.
from other industries.
Yeah, exactly. It makes sense.
Exactly.
Well, that's how you keep the price point down too, because if you're creating one thing at lower volume for one
it would be
small
insane.
niche industry, like the camera's gonna be $1,200.
That's exactly right.
Type of thing. It's just standard. But yeah, so it's always interesting. I always found it interesting how you start something like that. But it makes sense. You find a problem, you identify it, and you start going from there. So you're talking about cameras, because like I said, I have some of the lift ones. Like here it is 7 years later. I pulled camera photos a month ago, and everything's fine. Because in my world, I'm a wildlife biologist, and I'm in remote areas, and I'm doing surveys and things like that. Of like, dude, I don't want, because I ran into the same thing. I don't want to guess if this damn thing's going to work, because I don't want to go, like we talked about earlier, I'm not going in there every couple days to check this thing. I'm going to bait the station. I'm going to put the sign up so I know what camera location I'm at. I've got the camera up. I want that thing to run for at least a week and a half before I even think about going in there. I usually plan for 2 weeks, but I get itchy and I want to go out there. At least a week is my minimum, to go out there. But, go out there and all sprayed down with scent control and crap, which is another thing. I think a lot of people will kind of I'm just going to walk back there, and go. So that's another troublesome thing too. But, I've always tell people, man, you get what you pay for.
Yeah, to a certain
extent, and that was one of the things, with your guys' cameras, the price point was always so good. I'm like, dude, this isn't breaking the bank at all. I can buy 2 or 3 of these things, and here it is. I think I have 4 or 5 now. But I'm like 7 years later. I'm like, I haven't even, I know you got newer models, but I'm just like, I have a hard time. I'm like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Those original cameras were tanks, man.
Yeah, they are, and I talked to your brother about it a lot too, because, his daughter and my daughter play travel softball together. And it's like, we talk about it a lot. I'm like, yeah, man. I'm like, I love those damn things.
Yeah.
Talking about the seals and stuff, like a tank, like I got one of them that has a broken clip on it, but I'm like, it's still, nothing gets in there. Yeah. Things get locked up, like it doesn't move. Right. The cameras, I've got them pretty set. Like I said, the new property, I had to kind of do some, finagling as far as, detective work on where I wanted to put them, but they haven't moved. Like I've got them mounted up, and I go out there and change batteries and go out there and, memory cards and just make sure the settings are good. But yeah, anyway, so you kind of get what you pay for. So let's talk about what other kind of information. So I know you mentioned earlier about the content you guys put out, the educational space.
Yes.
So I remember you guys used to do blogs and little videos about different batteries and stuff like that, different types of cameras. So what are some things, kind of some general, pieces of information that, you can elevate or pitch for people here as far as, like you said, you keep talking about power source and things like that, SD cards.
Yeah, there is some applicable, we call them best practices to get the most out of your trail cameras. And I mentioned cameras working through voltage signals, and that starts with your power source. Like if you have, and again, this isn't, I'm trying to think of how I want to frame this up. People tend to think about the major purchase and not think about all the accessories or things needed in conjunction with that major purchase.
To make it run smooth.
Right. So a lot of times people will spend, $200 on a camera, and then they'll go buy batteries from Dollar General for 99 cents. And like, it's just not, you're operating on a crutch. It's like trying to run a marathon with a broken foot.
Yeah.
And it's just not going to work. So when it comes to power sources, we tell people to stay as far away from alkaline batteries as possible. When you start looking at the capacity and the discharge rate of an alkaline battery, every time a high drain device is operated on alkaline batteries. Number one, they have a water-based electrode. So in cold temperatures, the resistance starts to change on that battery. They can freeze, they can leak, and then they cause damage to that product. But from a discharge perspective, like if you have a 12-volt product, all of our products are 12 volts. They operate between 9 and 12 volts. That's the operating capacity. An alkaline battery is 1.5 volts, brand new out of the box. But every time that device does a function, takes a picture, video, even in its resting stage, it's still pulling some current there. So that voltage starts to decrease. And when you get to like 55%, like think about 55% of 1 point, let's call it 50% of 1.5, you're at 0.75 volts, times that by 8 in a 12-volt product. All of a sudden you're below 9 volts. You think you have 50% capacity, but in reality you don't. There's not enough voltage there to run the product. So we tell people to run lithium batteries because number one, they have more capacity. They have 3.2 amp hours, I think, is the capacity on a lithium battery. They have a constant voltage output of 1.7 volts all the way to 3 amp hours. So the difficult thing there is in a trail camera, when you get your battery capacity readings, they're reading your voltage. So with that constant voltage output, it's going to tell you have 100% battery life. That is true out to 3 amp hours of used capacity. And then by the time you hit 3.2, they're completely dead. So the analogy that we like to use is, a lot of guys are familiar with power tools, right? Like a battery, a lithium battery drill. You can take that drill, maybe you're building a deck, you can run 3,000 screws into those deck boards. And then all of a sudden in 2 screws, your battery's dead, right? The same thing applies to lithium AA. So that's an easy best practice. Like stay away from alkaline batteries, limit the problems or the variables you have there, run lithiums. It's more expensive, but time is money, and your camera data is so much more efficient, and the experience is better, right? So that is one thing. The other thing, you mentioned SD cards. Making sure that your SD card is compatible with the brand or specific model of your camera is a big deal. They're not interchangeable or plug and play, especially in today's world. Most major card manufacturers they're producing these things at mass volume for high-end photography or videography equipment. So you start looking at writing speeds, and maybe it's a 120 megabytes per second, or it's a UHS-1, or maybe even the capacity of the card. There's different file formats on those. So just reading through your user manual and recognizing what card is recommended, like your user manual on that product is your best friend. I know as guys, like we don't like to flip through a book of 20 pages to tell us something that we think we already know, but trust me, you don't know it. So use your user manual on that stuff. But beyond that, there's, I don't know. I mean, we have a lot of really detailed blogs and videos that get really technical if you're a guy looking for, what triggers a camera? A lot of people think that they're motion cameras. No, it's not really motion. A PIR sensor is a dual element sensor is monitoring the infrared radiation of an environment, and when one of those elements have a different reading, that's what causes the camera to have a trigger event and take a photo or take a video. So when guys are getting false images, they're like, I don't know what's going on. Like maybe it's the sun hitting a leaf, and that changes. So understanding that at a detailed level, which a lot of guys don't want to do, but take 5 minutes and read and search the web, scrub the web for some of that information. I promise you will have a better experience with your cameras.
Yeah, well, another thing is too is going to places like the National Deer Association. I mean, they've got content on there too on how to set up trail camera surveys, where to position your camera, how to set it up, because that's another thing too. Like you said, those infrared lasers, is making sure all the vegetation's down, making sure there's nothing that's gonna. It's because, like you said, it's not the motion, But if you look at those photos, a lot of people think that they are because, like, hey, this false trigger, it's all vegetation. But if you also look, the sun's shining through.
Exactly.
That has variability in that temperature. So going through there, the weed whacker, and stuff like that. It's hey, you're going to be loud and things like that, but it's prep your site to make sure for that longevity of success, and that's, you hit it on the head earlier when you said, a lot of people will buy, like, okay, I gotta spend $400 or $300 on this camera, and then they don't think about how expensive buying a 32 pack of lithium batteries are to have. How many? You don't need to buy the $60 SD card because you're not doing high end photography.
Exactly.
You don't need the 4K. You know, everyone thinks, oh, 4K, my trail camera photo is gonna be better. If the camera is not designed to do that, like you're wasting $40, you know,
100%.
on those things. So, you know, it's just the good prep, and we're probably gonna have a video put out. I mean, there's other ones out there on how to properly set up things and you know, camera settings and stuff like that. So future content people, because he lives 30 minutes from me, so there might be something there. But yeah, that's always something too. And then, you know, I always talk about too, what do you kind of have in your bag? Like the trail camera bag. Okay, I've got my Exodus camera. It's like, all right, I need to plan for this. Like, you know, for me, again, biologist, I'm prepped for the field. Like I go out in the field, I have everything I need. I've got my own trail camera bag. I've got my stuff in there. What's the you know, have to have list everyone should have with their trail cameras?
Always carry a handsaw. Always some type of handsaw. Maybe sometimes I even carry pruners too, or a pair of shears. So those things are always in my bag. I always have an extra, at least one set of batteries, just in case you have some type of malfunction. A lot of times I'll carry an extra battery tray as well. With that, I also carry my SD card case. One thing I didn't mention about like kind of the best practice around SD cards, not only knowing what SD cards to use, but having 2 cards for every camera, and then you label those cards. Like if your camera, let's call it camera A, so you have card A1 and card A2, because if you do run into a problem, maybe the camera's not writing to the card, or maybe the photos or the file allocation tables aren't right, or something on that card, then you can kind of identify what problem. Maybe it's card A is giving you a problem, it's not the camera, because it works with card 2. So properly storing that stuff, keeping that stuff labeled, is a big deal. And I always carry that SD card case with me wherever I go. So like I usually, like in Ohio, we run, I mean, there was a time where I was running 100 cameras in Ohio. I'm not there now. I would say probably 30 to 40 cameras is pretty typical.
Start getting more efficient.
Exactly. And a lot of that stuff's test sites and different things. So when you think about that, that's carrying around 30 or 40 SD cards. So I got a couple cases of those, you know, waterproof cases that I carry in my bag at all times. Another thing in the summertime I like to carry is permethrin. And a lot of people spray down to avoid ticks and mosquitoes and that kind of stuff. But I also like to apply that to my camera strap, maybe sometimes around the base of the tree, because one of the things that a lot of people run into is like insect infestation, like on their cameras. Those cameras are putting out heat. They have to dissipate the heat. And for whatever reason, insects like to make nests, whether it's spiders, ants, whatever it is. But if you're able to apply permethrin to your camera through the summer months, that stuff is good for like 6 or 8 weeks. And we found really good success just soaking your straps in that stuff, or maybe you spray around the camera. I wouldn't put it on the camera, but around the base of the tree, above it, below it. And it keeps that stuff away from the camera. Yeah,
so another thing, I stepped off to grab. I thought I had a bigger one over there, but the camera can't really see these. But you see these rubber twist ties, these gear ties now. And they make these that are actually really big. It's my absolute favorite thing because they fit behind your camera. So anybody listen, there's a plug here, right? But they go in there, and I'd like to get these big orange ones because they stand out to me. Deer can't see in that spectrum of color, so it works really good for identifying my camera. But you talk about long lasting. I mean, I like straps, but I don't like straps. You know, at the same time, the straps come in handy for the bigger diameter trees, but the smaller diameter trees, man, these things work well. You can buy like a pack of these things for pretty cheap. So that's something I throw in mind. And the stuff that you listed, I think that's good too. You know, so I always have, you know, those in mind. But yeah,
the gear ties is a good tip. And actually, you know, the cameras are shipped. Our cameras are shipped with a 1-inch, 6-foot strap or whatever. I use paracord on.
I've done that before too.
So I usually have paracord in my pack as well.
Yeah, I had one of those. What is it? It's probably a bad word for you, but the Moultrie camera bag or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, but I've got more cameras now than that thing will hold. So it's like I got my backpack. I got all that shit in there too. Yeah. It's like you start going in there. It also, you know, view a viewer. You know, I mean, you can view the cameras on your phone, on the cameras themselves, but the viewer works pretty well. Having that to plug into my phone and go on there. Yeah.
Just make sure if you're buying a card reader, make sure that it's a certified device and you're not buying like XYZ brand from Amazon, because they will corrupt your SD cards eventually.
Yeah, because you're always going to have unforeseen issues out there, unless you're like me and forget your password when you set your password on there, and then I got to call Chad. I got to call Chad and be like, "Hey, man, like I have an idea what this thing is, but I've tried every combination, and I'm locked out of this damn thing."
Well, that's funny, because that's actually a mistake that we made on that first camera. You think about all the user interface of a camera, all the different settings, and all the stuff that you have to design or build to put into something like that. Like, we put no hard reset or bypass.
Yeah.
Into that first model, and then people would call and be like, "Oh, I forgot my password. What do we do?" And it's like, I don't really know. Like, we didn't think about that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you learn things as you go from a product company standpoint.
And I'll tell you too, and this is this is something that I do. Because theft is also a problem.
Yes.
So again, I have a consulting company where I do wildlife management, stuff like that. So, I have a lot of, business cards and things, but I made up kind of, I probably shouldn't even say it on here, but I made up these dummy tags, on there that have my logo on it, has my name, and it's got like, I'll pull up the Latin long and I'll put like, hey, this is, you're being cameraed, viewed by another secondary camera, blah, blah, blah. Like, just so people, like, it's just another layer of kind of security. Be like, oh, like these cameras are checked. Like there's a professional survey being done out here. Now, with people too, the Python locks and stuff like that. I mean, that gets pretty pricey. But again, you've got a plan. It's an investment, man. Like if you're not everyone's going to have 12 cameras. They're going to shell out the money for maybe 3 or 4, 5, whatever, buy some Python locks, buy all the other stuff, good batteries and stuff. I mean, set yourself up. Like there's those additional costs. Like same thing with my truck. I bought a brand new truck last year. I bought a Ram, and it's like, hey, my buddy is a Dodge mechanic. He's like, make sure you're comfortable with putting 89 in there, because with the Hemis, you got to put the 89 in there. And it's like, okay, well, I didn't think about that, but it's, it's just those little things that you don't think about, that when you're going to make that investment on a trail camera, it's like, it's with any gear, a bow. Yeah, you go look at that new Hoyt or that new Matthews, that's $1,200. But then you start pricing out your optics and everything like that. You're like, I'm going to have $2,500 into this bow when it's all said and done. Between a dozen arrows, practice arrows, hunting arrows, tips, field tips. It's like, man, a little quiver for shooting out in the yard or whatever. I mean, it adds up. Yep. It's almost more expensive to buy the accessories when it's all said and done than it is the actual camera.
That's why.
Or piece of equipment.
100%. I take the philosophy from a gear perspective, like buy once, cry once. Like make the investment, buy something that's going to last you more than a season or two. And then you don't have to make that same purchase 24 months later. You have it.
Yeah. Well, same thing I've been texting you about, I'm up in my camo gear.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey man, there's all these brands out there. I have the Kui stuff. I have some Sitka stuff. I don't have any First Light stuff yet, but I've always been an Under Armour guy. I mean, I've got the same gear from Under Armour for 10 years.
Right.
Like it's just now starting to fray. And I'm good for camo, but I'm like, man, I need something for like the cold weather. I'm tired of wearing like 6 different layers on there. So that's getting a hold of you. I mean, it's just like anything. Like you look at the price of this stuff, and you're like, oh my god,
it's expensive.
I mean, just a rain jacket the other day on some of the not just everyone was kind of Sitka is expensive. Get what you pay for, man. Under Armour was expensive when I bought it, but I've had it for 10 years. I've been dry, and not been cold. But I've been looking at rain jackets now from all the brands. They're like $300.
Yeah.
But you get what you pay for, man. Like you're going to be dry, type of thing. So I mean, just gear. If you're in this world, you can't bitch about price, because it's not cheap. There's no hobby anymore.
Nope.
That you cry once or buy once, cry once, but also it's easier to ask for forgiveness and permission if you're married like we are, because I'll never forget it when we moved. I bought a new gun safe, and I got it put in, and I had it all loaded up and everything, and my wife comes down and she's fucking furious, man. And she's like, I'm like, what are you like? So like, is it? I mean, it's in my room, but I'm like, is this like a bad spot? Like, do you not want it here? Like, what's going on? She's like, no. She's like, if someone were to ask me like how many guns you have, I would have said, this number. She goes, what the hell? She's like looking in there. She's like, where do these even come from? I'm like, I don't tell you when I buy these things. I'm like, what the hell would I tell you for? You know, and I'm like, right now, I'm sorry. I'm not going to ask you. Like, it's one of those things. Same thing. You come home with a new bow or, you know, a new tree. You know, I came home and I'm putting a deer stand together out in my driveway. And she's like, you got to be kidding me. I'm like, what do you want me to do? You know, it's just this especially hunting and outdoors, man. They're hobbies that, good Lord. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't imagine starting from scratch because, you know, people have heard me say I didn't grow up hunting. I didn't get started in hunting until, you know, college. I was like 20 years old, 21 when I started. I mean, so it's been, you know, we'll say conservatively, where I really got 15 years. He's like, hey, I look at this stuff I have now. I'm like, I couldn't imagine buying. Well, actually, I can because I recently, last year, got into duck hunting.
Oh boy!
Oh my God!
That's a whole nother.
Am I absolutely? Well, you know, I got bird dogs. I got upland, so I do a lot of pheasant hunting and stuff, which is expensive on itself. But I went duck hunting for the first time, and I am hooked. I mean, I think so I killed my first 2 ducks last year, and I think in like the next couple of days, I had like $400 worth of decoys. I ordered like 6 or 7 calls online. My Amazon box shows up. My wife's like, "What?" I got the lanyard with all the calls on, and my wife's like, "You've just shaking her head." Like, here we go again. Now I'm like, luckily I got to get a pair of waders. Now I got to go buy the jacket, and I'm like, here we go all over again. So I sympathize with everybody for sure. All right, so yeah, it's with the cameras. It's always good stuff. So, the whitetail cribs. That's another thing. So how many people, I don't even, you know, it's starting to gain traction. I know I watched the episodes. They're awesome because I mean, it's a good idea. What brought that around?
So we were on a trip in Iowa recording a podcast and walking this guy's house, and like this trend had happened multiple times over and over. Like you walk into somebody's house, basically a total stranger, and the first thing they want to do is go into their room, their man cave, their trophy room, whatever you want to call it, and tell all their deer stories. Like, this is this buck I killed in 2018. This is how I killed him. This is my first buck. It's not very big, but you know the memory lasts forever. And we come back home from that trip, and we were just thinking of like how much better that kind of off the cuff conversation was than the actual podcast. And we're like, we should just go in and film that like right out of the get-go and turn that into something. And then we had a brainstorm session, and then immediately the thought was like, okay, the early 2000s whitetail or MTV cribs, like you go to these celebrities' houses and see how they live. And that was something that I am very interested in. Like you call me a professional hunter. I am nowhere near professional. There are so many guys out there like Andy May and the DeQuistos and these guys that are just savages in the whitetail woods, and they live different. They like there's something particular about the way that they live and that carries over to the whitetail woods. So for me, I wanted to know how, like, what are they anal about? Is it something organizationally with how they store things? Just the whole thought of going into somebody's house, seeing how they live, and seeing how that transferred or carried over to their hunting was kind of what inspired it. But yeah, it was basically a spinoff off of that idea from what MTV Cribs was in the late 90s, early 2000s, or whatever that show was on. And we started strong, like out of the gate. We said, okay, we're going to publish one of these every Wednesday for the whole year. So there's 52 episodes in a year. And then we did that for 2 years.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, we're in Ohio, and then we're in Iowa, and then we're in Illinois, and then we're in Kentucky, and then we're in Pennsylvania, and then we're in Minnesota and Wisconsin. And it's like, all right, we gotta reel this in.
Yeah.
To a certain point.
Are you guys going to expand it? I mean, I know it's called Whitetail Cribs, but are you going to expand it all? Because I mean, I would imagine it's you're going to start running into a hard set on finding people that have a home or a collection that's worth filming. So are you thinking about like, I mean, probably not, but I mean, you know, as it grows, you know, it's just like a podcast and you reach out to people, but like, hey, you know, put you on the show, like whatever. But I mean, have you, just reaching out to like people that maybe do like, you know, elk and moose and bear. And I mean, I know some of the episodes you guys have had other species in there.
Absolutely.
But maybe there's guys that like, hey, I live in, you know, the Dakotas and I hunt muleys and, you know, things like that. So it's not just
We don't have anything carved out specifically for like an elk cribs or something specific, but like integrating that stuff into the show is kind of it's kind of already happened naturally. Like so many whitetail guys are doing some Western stuff too. So it's not always about specifically whitetails. Like we did an episode in Michigan where a guy did like the upland slam, the waterfowl slam, all kinds of different sheep and goats and like all kinds of different stuff. So there's no shortage of possible content. Now, from a scheduling perspective, we have dialed that back and said, okay, we're only going to do 12 to 15 episodes a year, and we're only going to publish them through quarter 3 and quarter 4, like when critical hunting content is being consumed.
Yeah.
So we have done that because I think when you look at whether it's on Netflix or Amazon Prime or wherever you consume like television series, all of those series have some kind of lifespan.
Yeah.
Like when you think about the iconic stuff like Seinfeld or take The Simpsons out of it, I guess, because they've been on for decades and decades and decades. But when you look at a season of content, there's 12 to 15 episodes, and maybe that show runs for 5 to 8 years, maybe like call it 7 years average. Well, that's you're at about 100 episodes. Dude, we busted out 114 episodes in like 2.5 years, like 30 months.
Yeah, burn you out.
Right. So
from a scheduling standpoint and editing and stuff like that too. I couldn't imagine. So with the podcast and stuff too, I mean, so it's definitely, you guys have no shortage of content, that's for sure. And for everyone listening, like I said, this stuff will be published, as far as how to reach you guys and stuff, because you guys got the podcast going too, which is a good podcast.
We have 3 podcasts.
Yeah. So I mean, you guys got a pretty good umbrella going underneath you there.
Yeah.
So how many staff are you up to now? Because I mean, back in the day when you guys first started, it was you, Matt,
Steve,
and just your brother, right?
It was 3 of us.
And now it's how many people do you have with you?
We have 7 guys.
I got you.
We have 2 full-time videographers and editors on staff.
That's huge. That's worth their weight. It's worth their weight in gold.
They do the 3 podcasts, all the YouTube stuff. So yeah, building a team. And we were at a point, 2015, 16, and 17. Like we were we didn't have any money. Like we weren't seriously
funded. Still a startup, basically.
Yeah, I mean, we were bootstrapping everything. I think that's really important that we learn those critical lessons about failures and successes and where to spend money, where not to spend money. And going through that ownership transition in 2018, I think was pretty critical because we knew, like in today's age, like if you're not a content company, if you're not producing content, man, you're gonna have a rough life ahead of you. I mean, that's just the way that
especially
it is.
In your industry, like the hunting industry is so consumed with content. If you're trying to sell, outdoor gear for the hunting industry and you're not, like you said, putting out content and a lot of content,
right? Like
you said, it's a good strategy for what you guys have because, I haven't seen the growth because I'm not, involved in the company, but, on the presence that you guys have and the amount of people that are mentioning your name and stuff like that. I mean, having the shows like Whitetail Cribs, having the 3 podcasts, having the gear and stuff like that, that's what makes... I mean, you look at all the big companies. I mean, that's what makes it, because not only do you want to buy the gear, but you want to rep their shit. You want to follow what they're doing. I mean, look at like the Black Rifle guys.
Yeah.
I mean, their coffee's great, right? And then they have awesome content. Like if
really
you don't
good.
like I mean, who's not going to watch that and then listen to their I mean, it's a perfect recipe for success.
Absolutely.
With that as you're building. I mean, as you know, I got to explain, building the brand and stuff like that. So, but all right, man. So, yeah, I think we're pretty much wrapping it up here. So, anything new, exciting you guys got coming on down? Give you a moment to kind of talk about what you guys have planned, new products, things that just kind of let you go from there.
When is this going live?
So, probably in about 2 weeks is kind of the thing.
Okay.
So, not really much longer than that.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, just ask. We have so much in the pipeline. Been working on Gen 2 housing to kind of basically made a tooling investment on the mechanical side or mechanical design of the cameras. So we have a standard SD card camera. Again, looking at failures and pain points on the product. What can we get better at? We have a dual lens camera coming out that eliminates some failure points with the your IR filter. We're looking at power supplies, doing some things on a technical level with a 2 series power design, moving away from AA. So that camera will launch in January of 2023 is kind of the timetable there. But also, a lot of people know us as a trail camera company. We launched as an outdoor gear company with a focus on trail cameras, and we've kind of dabbled in some other markets or product categories that were failures in those early days. We dabbled in with e-bikes with a brand called Boulder Bikes, never came to market. We dabbled in some ozone products with broken nose scent systems, almost came to market. So we've always been kind of looking at other product categories and opportunities. And one of those things we talked about, archery. Last year I went through a pretty big struggle trying to follow like the high FOC, really heavy arrow trend, and it did not work for me. And again, with a critical mindset, I had to figure out, like, why isn't this working? So the last 10 months, I've been kind of neck deep in the science of archery, like arrow flight, basically. So in a couple of weeks, we are launching an Exodus arrow. Basically, we built an algorithm where it's a self-serve portal on the website. There's a bunch of data endpoints. You put your data in. We spit you out an arrow. Like this is the perfect arrow for your setup. So tailored for you, for your setup. And that has moved really fast. Like to do that in 10 months. We were, again, very fortunate with some industry contacts that we were able to license a bunch of patents and a bunch of IP stuff and follow in, kind of ride the coattails of another manufacturer. So we're able to license those patents and spit out some really exciting stuff. So we have that coming. And the launch on that is supposed to be June 1st. It may be plus or minus a week or something like that.
You're telling me I got to buy more arrows now. All right.
We'll load you a dozen. Stop by the shop and we'll load you a dozen.
All right, man. So, I think that's good. Tell everyone where they can find you at. I know it's a long list, and I'll have it all published down in the description of this too.
Man,
so.
It's all things Exodus Outdoor Gear. So ExodusOutdoorGear.com. Sorry, it's a super long domain. It's a pain in the butt, tongue twister. But if you just Google that on the internet, our YouTube will pop up. Anywhere where you listen to the podcast, the Exodus podcast, the Land podcast, and the Deer Gear podcast. And that's pretty much it, man. That's
awesome, man. Well, thanks for coming in. We'll have to do this again, definitely.
Absolutely.
All right, buddy. All right, everybody. Thanks. And that's a wrap on another episode of the HuntScience podcast. I want to thoroughly take this time to thank everybody who has listened or even watched till the end of this episode and had the opportunity to hopefully enjoy the show that we put out for you. It's something that we're really trying to do and take notes and put good quality content for everybody to enjoy. We want to take this moment also to, if you enjoyed the show, check us out over on our social media platforms. Give us a like, give us a follow, check that bell notification, look for the content that we're putting out. Of course, reach out to us, leave comments. Did you like the show? We would love to hear your reviews of the show and any concerns that you have, any updates or any type of feedback to make our content better. We're always open ears for the people that are consuming our show and our content. We want to hear from you. What is it that you want to see and what is it that you would like us to do? If you want to check us out on any of our social media, first off, you can head over to our website, go to www.huntsciencepodcast.com. You can check us out on Instagram at HuntScience_podcast, or you can check us out over at our Facebook page at The HuntScience Podcast. Any of those is open. You can, like I said, feel free to comment and all the above that you do with social media. I just want to take this time again to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for everybody for watching and listening to the content that we're putting out. It means the world to me, and I can't wait for you guys to join us on another episode. Until then, everybody, have a great day, and we'll see you next time.